Welcome to a special year-end edition of the France 24 debate. I'm François Picard. Let he or she who has not bought that last-minute Christmas present on Amazon cast the first stone. As it nears its 25th birthday, has the Seattle-based firm founded by Jeff Bezos already conquered the world? Nowadays, wherever Amazon goes, consumers pay less. But also, say critics, margins compress for traditional sellers, whose share value then tumbles. We've talked a lot about Google and Facebook's outsized power, but does the real power ultimately lie with Amazon? We're only at the dawn of a new era for capitalism. The hot commodity is no longer steel or oil, it's information. Amazon not only knows the consumer habits of shoppers, it's got our postal addresses and our tastes. What with its very affordable Amazon Prime video streaming service and its highly lucrative AWS big data services. On both sides of the Atlantic, it's hurting traditional retailers like supermarket giants Walmart and Carrefour, and even going offline with, for instance, last year's purchase of Whole Foods. Amazon, which still minimizes its tax bill in Europe by routing profits through the likes of Luxembourg. This is another tale of globalization, a company the world has embraced, but which only plays by U.S. rules. As France and the European Commission consider regulation and taxation for the GAFA tech giants across the Atlantic, what's fair and just when it comes to Amazon? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at what you could call Amazon Almighty. And with us, innovation strategist Guillaume Villon de Benveniste. He's the author of 1,200 billion on the table, how to capture it, create jobs, and make France the Silicon Valley of 2030.
Hi.
The glass is half full, Guillaume.
Thanks.
All right. Also joining us, economist Anne-Laure Delat, Deputy Director of CEPI, the French Institute for Research into International Economics. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hello, François.
Ava Sieve, Principal at Consultants Quantum Media, teaches at Columbia Business School.
Hello.
Thanks for being with us.
Sure.
And because we're wondering how this change affects us as human beings, we're also in need of a good digital sociologist. Fortunately, Antonio Casilli, who teaches at the Paris Institute of Technology, Télécom Paris Tech, happens to be with us. Thank you for that.
Thank you for having me here.
All right. Just how powerful is Amazon? Well, it even revived the Carnegie Deli recently. The legendary New York dining establishment went out of business a few years back, but for the second season of its Emmy Award-winning series, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which is on Amazon Prime, set in the late 1950s, the Carnegie Deli came back to life, albeit temporarily. It was a pop-up deli.
I mean, this is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I mean, you come here, and you're taking everything in, and the pastrami is to die for. It's a bee's knees in New York City.
That was an actor, by the way. Eva, your thoughts on the power of Amazon?
Well, let's do some stats, okay? So Amazon, as a percentage of total e-commerce in the world, is 5.6%. Okay? It's pretty small, excluding the United States. In the United States, it's 48% of e-commerce. So it's still pretty small out there in the world as far as the percentage of what is being sold. And they actually don't make money. So they're busy taking money out of the pockets of smaller vendors. But for the last 6-7 years, they've made less than 3% overall. Their international business is lost in 2017, which is the last year that's available, 6%. So it's negative 6% in terms of its operating income.
But investors believe.
Well, investing and operating income are completely different. It's a glamour stock. It just means that you have to convince people that they should be in there with you. And it doesn't really matter if you put your money in at a certain time and get it out at a certain time, whether or not the company is actually making money.
Guillaume Villon de Benveniste, Amazon, which is rivaling at one point earlier this month with Apple as $1 trillion company on the New York Stock Exchange. Is it overvalued?
Well, there's a big debate on its valuation. There's a big debate in FANG stocks, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. But what's interesting is that if you compare the valuation of Amazon with Walmart, Walmart's valuation is lower, and yet its sales are much bigger, because Amazon is making about Walmart is making about $500 billion in sales, And
So
Amazon.
what's the lesson you learned from that?
Well, there is some people that wonder if it's not too valued. The valuation is not too high. Personally, I believe that it's really creating a new way of operating a business with warehouse automation and an obsession with customers. And so maybe this valuation makes sense after all.
Maybe it makes sense after all. Does it make sense, Anne-Laure?
Well, I'm a bit surprised by the figures you just mentioned, because Amazon and the rest of the big companies are actually making a lot of profit. There are rising evidence of market power concentration. So actually the influence of those big companies, the economic influence of these big companies is rising tremendously, and it might actually backlash against them. So when you're talking about overvaluation, that's the first backlash. Obviously, those companies have lost, if I'm not wrong, like 25% of their value recently. They were about to reach the $1 trillion market capitalization, but sky has a limit actually. So investors are not crazy. They know that the market has a limit, and maybe the profit they're making and the margin they're actually getting. So, for example, the markup of those companies has increased by more than 40% recently. How can this has to stop sometime? So investors probably price that, and they're getting aware that this market share's gonna stop somewhere because of market limitation, but also probably backlash from by the governments, because some regulations will be implemented to restore competition. We can talk about the antitrust regulation that are being implemented currently. So there are a lot of political backlash against this market concentration by these big companies. And if I was an investor, I would definitely price that.
It's interesting, this comparison with Walmart, right? Because one is a traditional supermarket, which now is forced to do a bit of online sales as well. And the other starts as just an e-commerce site, a bit like eBay was a few years back. And what is the real world these days? Is I guess the question I want to ask Antonio Casilli.
Well, the real world is the world where Amazon operates. Actually, there is no distinction between an entirely offline and an entirely online retailer or enterprise for what it may. Well, anyway, the point is that Amazon is opening a few shops in the real world, meaning brick and mortars, and they are actively working against other companies. But the point is actually that Amazon is not only e-commerce. E-commerce is just one of the pillars. The AWS, meaning the big data services, is another big part of Amazon. And the third part, which is rarely mentioned, is Amazon Mechanical Turk, the impact that Amazon is having on our very perception of work. Amazon Mechanical Turk is actually a service that Amazon launched 10 years ago in 2006, more than that, 2005, 2006, in the mid-noughties. And that it was and it is an online market for labor. And it has, it has an impact on the way we perceive.
Positive or negative?
Well, it's actually introducing what Jeff Bezos described as human as a service, meaning that they just do piecework and people are paid 1-2 cents to perform microtasks. So the impact, in my opinion, is definitely negative.
Where are these people employed?
Well, these people are mainly in the US, but there is a big part of them, at least 40 to 50% of them, who are in India. And this is having really a big impact on the way labor is distributed worldwide.
All right, Amazon is hiring. This past November, it picked a suburb of Washington, D.C. and Long Island City, which is in the New York borough of Queens, for its new headquarters.
It's a great day for New York City. It's an extraordinary day for Queens. for every dollar we invest, we're going to get back about $9, give or take. So to find the money that we need to invest in the subways, invest in schools, etc., this is a big money maker for us.
A big money maker for us, he says, but not everyone's enamored. Locals worry the move will raise real estate prices, force out working families, while other points, and you heard it a bit in the voice of Andrew Cuomo there, to the big tax breaks offered to entice Amazon to New York City. U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, a frequent critic of Amazon, he tweeted, "We must end the race to the bottom where taxpayers in one city or state are forced to bid against each other for desperately needed jobs. Amazon and other large corporations do not need corporate welfare. Instead, they need to pay their fair share of tax." A2C, if you're a New Yorker, tell us.
I am. And, you know, Governor Cuomo isn't really well known for actually projecting in the future about how much money his state has. I mean, the state
He says it's going to fix the subways. We heard him there.
Yeah, whatever. Okay. So I think that, to put it in perspective, Amazon employs 566,000 people, not including Mechanical Turk, which are contract people around the world. The number of people that they're going to be hiring outside of Washington, D.C. and New York City are very small. It's a very small percentage of that. And there is an argument that they would have gone to those locations anyway, but they were busy doing what they do in the marketplace, which is they had an auction. They put up all the prices that everybody else offered, and they tried to get the best deal. That is a rational response to trying to relocate. So I can't blame Amazon for doing it. I can blame the cities for taking the bait and going ahead and putting out all this money and future.
So you agree with Bernie Sanders that they need to pay more tax?
I agree that it's really not a good idea for these cities to compete. I mean, the service economy is an unfair economy in general. It's not manufacturing. It's decentralized. Companies really can pay what they want. Workers have no comparisons, and so it just doesn't seem like it's a reasonable thing for a city to decide that they're the ones that can actually control these service economy salaries.
And by the way, Guillaume Villon de Benveniste, Amazon's opened up warehouses here in France, and they rolled out the red carpet for them, the government.
That's right.
Yeah.
But it's maybe a figure on the employment figures. So Walmart is making 3 times as much as sales as Amazon. They're employing 2 million people. And as you were saying earlier, Amazon is employing about 600,000 people. So there's a ratio. The ratio is somewhat comparable between Walmart and Amazon in terms of sales per number of employees. Mm-hmm. So when we tend to say that they're destroying jobs, when you compare it to Walmart, you can see that it's not as clear as it may seem.
But wasn't that the argument when Walmart came into these small towns? That they came and they were more efficient, and so they destroyed jobs in Main Street USA and so forth.
Yeah, that's
right. So
right.
it's essentially the next stage of what's going on.
Yeah, so then that means that there are multiple debates. One question is, does Walmart create jobs in comparison to local retail companies in small cities like Leesburg in Virginia? And then does Walmart destroy more jobs does Amazon destroy more jobs than Walmart?
And what's your conclusion?
Well, it may destroy some, but not that much. Just 10%, not more than Walmart does.
And Delane, you agree?
Well, I mean, the question is, do they destroy jobs? Another interesting question is that the big companies before these GAFA were actually employing much more employees in general. So these service companies or these companies are actually producing much less jobs than before. So to give a perspective, the 3 big car makers in Detroit were employing 1.2 million employees. This is not the figures you just gave about the GAFA. So in general, those big companies employ less employees than these big companies, employ less employees than the big one before. Then the second result that we have, that we know now, is that they are responsible for a part of the fall in the labor share. Like the way the profits, the value added is distributed between capital and labor. And there are rising evidence about that because of this market concentration, they have a lot of market power to pressure down wages.
All right, so we're getting to the heart of it here, Anne-Laure. What do you do? What do you tell if you're a policymaker in Europe to consumers who like buying that last-minute Christmas present on Amazon?
Well, especially if I'm in Europe, I'm trying to harmonize the tax, the European tax rate and the European tax base.
Is there a place for Amazon in your future?
Well, there is, but I want to harmonize the tax base. I want to tax the Amazon and the GAFA on the sales they are actually making in Europe instead of on the profits they're artificially transferring to Ireland. So especially if I am in Europe, on the top of my agenda, I'm trying to address this tax competition and this race to the bottom that you were mentioning before.
And once that's done, you think that the small jobs will come back?
So if you address tax competition and this race to the bottom, you're addressing the loss of tax revenues that we are facing in Europe. So there are projects. So the GAFA tax that is being implemented, that is trying to be implemented currently. The problem in Europe is that any decisions you make on tax requires unanimity. So as long as you have Luxembourg, Netherlands, and Ireland competing to get all the tax revenues, this will be difficult. But so just to answer your question, there is this job issue and there is this tax revenue issue. And this is something on the tax revenues issue, we can do something by coordinating our policies.
Coordinating with other European nations.
Yes.
When we come back in the France 24 debate, we're going to be looking at that very point about how you handle the big companies like Amazon in terms of what is the fair method of taxing them, and also what does the future hold for these online giants. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back. It's a special year-end edition of the France 24 debate. We're looking at Amazon Almighty, the ubiquitous tech giant, which is particularly apropos during the holiday shopping season, and whether it and not Facebook or Google might be the real giant of tomorrow. We're talking about it with innovation strategist Guillaume Villon de Benveniste, the author of 1,200 billion on the table, and how France could become the I'm shortening a little here, could become the Silicon Valley of 2030. France could really become the Silicon Valley of 2030?
Yes, it could. We need to invest more in innovation. And that's one thing that Amazon was able to do in a very compelling way. They were able to attract about $1.3 billion in investment capital before they ever returned the profit. And hopefully one day we'll be able to attract similar amounts of capital and invest that money in just one very promising startup.
There you go, a Frenchman who sees the glass half full. Also with us is economist Anne-Laure Delatte of CEPI, the French Institute of Research into International Economics. Welcome back. Welcome back to Eva Sieve, principal at consultants Quantum Media, who teaches at Columbia Business School, and Antonio Casilli, who teaches at the Paris Institute of Technology, who teaches digital sociology. Earlier this month, Germany and others dampened hopes of what Anne-Laure was talking about before the break, an ambitious plan for a Europe-wide coordinated strategy for taxing the GAFAs. In the midst of the yellow vest protests here in France, the economy and finance minister said the Macron government wouldn't be afraid to go it alone as early as the year to come.
France will tax the digital giants from 2019 if the other European countries don't take their responsibilities.
Antonio Casilli, are we on the cusp of a new phase when it comes to how Europe handles giants like Amazon?
Hopefully so. Well, the new phase actually is not that new, because when it comes to fiscal policy and, this brand of regulation, France was at the avant-garde. Back in 2013, Bercy, meaning the Finance Ministry of France, published a report on fiscal policies and how to tax, the giants like the GAFAMs, like Amazon and Google and Facebook. And the content of that report was basically that we do not have to tax them based on their sales, but based on the amount of data that they produce. And they also relate on the fact that these data are not produced by the big platforms themselves, but by the users. And users are citizens. And so basically the idea underlying this kind of fiscal policy is that, first of all, we have to recognize what the report described as the invisible labor, the digital labor, that we all perform for those platforms. Because every time we buy something on Amazon, we also qualify and publish reviews and rate items. And so we provide value to Amazon. And based on this...
Which they argue is the trade-off.
Yeah, well...
We're offering you a free service.
Yeah. I would put a lot of brackets around that free, because it's not free at all. This is the actual best part of their value that they can actually leverage. And this value is generated by the users. And so any fiscal policy that would leverage taxes on them should take this into account and basically say, although your, headquarters are in the US or anywhere else for fiscal optimization reasons, you have the persons who produce value for you. They are in each nation, and we should levy taxes on you based on this.
The data they're collecting from our purchases give them actually a lot of power compared to tiny competitors. The problem is, again, this market concentration, which gives a lot of data information to Amazon platform compared to other small competitors which don't have this capacity to collect those data. Then you were saying that levy taxes on this data and not on sales. We're not even there. I mean, we're not levying taxes on sales which are made in France. We're levying taxes on the profit which is artificially transferred to Ireland, Netherlands, etc.
So there was a problem in the United States because the sales tax are by state. Mm-hmm. And there was a huge fight, and they eventually took it up to the Supreme Court. And in fact, now you have to pay taxes on sales, even if, let's say, there's not a warehouse in your state. And now they're everywhere, so that was easy. And so I think it's logical to think that they should pay taxes on sales, and they should stop trying to launder it.
And should users be, if I understand Antonio correctly, retributed for the fact that they're contributing to the wealth, because data, again, is the hot commodity and the information.
So I agree with that idea, even as a business person and very pro-business, because, in fact, that is a value. However, the response could be just what the response was, let's say, in Spain, when they tried to get Google to pay for newspapers, for newspaper information on their Google paper, whatever it is, right? The newspapers just stopped publishing. They said, okay, fine. You want us to pay you for it? Well, we're just not going to give you the data. Mm-hmm. And what happened was the largest newspapers did fine because people just naturally went to them. But all the small players who needed Google News to get people to see their product, in fact, suffered. So I think what's happening is consumers basically benefit from concentration, because what's happening is all the data is known, the prices are known, and so forth. Okay. Now, they're not getting the tax support, but, we would argue if we were Gilets jaunes that we don't want to be taxed. We'd rather just decide ourselves and screw the taxes. Sorry for saying that word, but, forget the taxes and then, go ahead and just let us decide.
I'm not sure. Sorry.
Because all the information is there. What Amazon is doing is it's ruining the market for small players. It takes all the information for small players and then creates a product to compete against the small players. It has fees. It changes its mind all the time. And so even though it makes no money, which I did say, it's 2.3%, They're busy ruining the world market for so many products. It's crazy.
Before I turn to you, Anne-Mélodie, let me just explain this, because this is the heart of the point in which the European Commission is looking at. Facebook insists it's a platform, not a publisher. Amazon sees itself as more of an e-commerce platform. That's how it bills itself, than a retailer. Enter the crucial notion of third-party sellers.
Yes.
Amazon makes more and more of its money hosting businesses, small and large, who sell their wares through its services. The bumps you see on the chart correspond to fourth quarter sales in the run-up to Christmas. That's a problem, says the European Commission, which has opened an unfair competition probe against Amazon. And you saw there that what had the commissioner Margaret Vestager said. She said that they're a big guy in the same market. So how do they treat the data they get from the little guy? Does that give them an advantage that cannot be matched?
Well, so just to answer the Gilets jaunes comment, I'm not sure that the Gilets jaunes don't want taxes. They just want a more fair redistribution. If you can tax, if you can tax Starbucks more than the Café du Coin, then they'll be happy, I think. Well, on the anti-competitive, the antitrust regulation.
Yeah, this notion, it's a little technical, right? Third-party sellers. A lot of our viewers don't know what that means, but Ada just explained it. The idea that basically there's all these small companies. You talk about Le Café du Coin, the equivalent of the local cafe, which has to use Amazon.
Yeah. So this antitrust regulation, you were saying that it's technical. I'm not sure. Everything which is technical is actually political. So in the end, what you're saying is that in Germany, so at the national level as well as at the European level, there are more and more pressures to regulate those big actors, which have actually taken advantage of their position, which is which is like closer to oligopoly, which is oligopolistic position. So they've taken advantage of their position to bring out their small competitors out of the market, which we have seen also at the beginning of the previous century. Maybe we can go back to this after, but we've seen that before. The steel and oil companies, those big companies during the Gilded Age, there's been an increase in competition at the beginning, and then they've gained this position as oligopoly.
As a cartel, in the case of oil.
Yeah. Sorry, my pronunciation.
Would you say that the GAFAs are a cartel?
I'd say that we're seeing exactly the same
concentration.
The same concentration. The concentration of power. So market power. So. For example, when you were saying that transparency on data, on prices is beneficial to consumers, what I'm saying is that, yes, prices decrease, but they could actually decrease much more. When you see that markups, so the gap between prices and production cost has increased by almost 50%, that gives you an idea of the market power they have. Okay, this margin, the profit they've made, increase a lot, so we could actually benefit even much more.
I'm not sure about the margins. The margins are terrible for them. The only margin that's good is the cloud margin, and that's only 10% of their business. All their other margins, as I said, the North American margin is only 2.6%, and the international division is negative 6%.
And yet, Amazon Mechanical Turk is 40 to 50% the margin that they
correct, but it's tiny. It's a tiny part of it.
It is tiny.
So service, but the service economy is terrible for individuals. It's terrible. And so, whatever Amazon does or doesn't do, as things move from production and manufacturing to service, it's so hard for individuals to actually make a living wage. It's just the way it is in terms of central information and so forth. So, we can talk about Amazon, but I think there's this underlying problem of the service industry taking over versus manufacturing, which is much more productive.
So do you agree, Guillaume, this is much more than just a fair system of taxation?
Oh, yeah. And it's also a geopolitical subject because we're talking about the beginning of the 20th century when there was a second industrial revolution. A lot of these second industrial revolution companies were European, and a lot of them were French, in fact. And now, at the 21st century, none of these companies are French and none of these companies are European.
Why?
Well, because we have not invested in innovation, and because we need to invest much more than in innovation that we're doing today.
Can it be done on a supranational level, or it has to be done country by country in Europe?
It's difficult to answer the question in that way. I'd say that my personal opinion is that it's a question of the quality of the investment decisions that we take. We're wasting a lot of capital today in France because we're not making the right decisions. It's based on intuition, where a company like Amazon is based on measurable metrics. And it's a test and learn process that does not exist at this point in the startup world in France. Mm-hmm. But I'd like to say also that Amazon is an exceptional company in the sense that in its first letter to shareholders, the founder of Amazon said that customer satisfaction is more important than generating revenue or shareholder revenue or dividends for investors. So he puts customer satisfaction at the highest level, the top priority. And so in a sense, although they're not paying taxes as much as they could in Europe, European consumers and American consumers are benefiting from Amazon in the form of lower prices.
Antonio Casilli, what do your students think of Amazon? What's the street cred of Amazon as compared to, say, Facebook?
Well, my students, first of all, 50% of them are sociologists. The other 50% are engineers. So there is a definite split between them. Right. Some of them adore Amazon. They consider it like a success story. Others are completely horrified by it because of the impact it is having on the economics and on the social body in general. When it comes to Amazon as an economic entity, one has to has to consider that Amazon, in a way, is not like an enterprise. Again, it's not a company, it's not a firm like in the 20th century sense of the word. A platform is another thing. A platform is something halfway between a market and a company. Like a company, it has a definite structure with a hierarchy and limits some forms of externalization. But as a market, as a marketplace, as an intermediary, again, it just attracts other people who produce value for them. So from this point of view, one should never evaluate what Amazon is doing and what it's doing with its profits, for instance, using the standards of 20th century firms. Because 20th century firms have stopped investing, for instance, on innovation, and they're just focusing now on, the existing one, traditional one, incumbents. They're just focusing on dividends and producing dividends for their investors. On the contrary, Amazon and the other GAFAMs seem to, be motivated by this kind of ideal of we invest in innovation. And so from this point of view, again, we do not have to mistake the core business. The core business is not retail, it's not commodities. It is data, because data is the asset that they can leverage to produce innovation.
And we see in China these big platforms like Alibaba, which aspire to being a one-stop shop, right? Where you can do your social networking, your shopping, your social media, all in one place, which, by the way, is easy to police for the central authorities. Mm-hmm. Is that Amazon's ultimate aim?
To an extent, yes, but one might say that Amazon is an inspiration for others. I mean, Google is trying to do the same thing. Facebook is trying to do the same thing, like creating marketplaces for commodities or for services. And from
is that good or bad? Is that
it's just a convergence of business models.
But how do you personally feel about it?
I feel scared, and I feel that one has to take this from a political point of view. And from a political point of view means in terms of regulation and in terms of providing voice to civil society in order for them not to be lured into this kind of fake sense of security that is given by the commodity side of it.
Eva Sieve, is Antonio right to be scared?
Well, I would say you are in one extent because everyone always thinks of the U.S. as having imperialistic cultural instincts, right?
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, because there's so many different uh, nationalities which can absolutely access this, and that their products, their information, their culture can be spread around the world to a lot of other people. On the other hand, you've got small places in the middle of Africa who can in fact sell their product and get it out. Now, there's a lot of appropriation, that kind of discussion, but I do think it's a give and a take.
If I tend to disagree to an extent, because when it comes to Amazon, the marketplace for commodities, yes, it is open to everybody.
Yes.
But if you focus on Amazon Mechanical Turk, sorry for coming back to this, Amazon definitely decided back in 2013 that that marketplace is limited to 2 countries, the US and India, and they actively stopped any other country from accessing it. So even the benefits of it are now limited, and they do act as gatekeepers to their market, either the market for web services, the market for commodities, and the market for labor.
And Nordela, which...
Maybe I just would like to give a macro perspective in the sense that you're talking about investing in innovation. This is in their culture. First, what we know now is that with this economy, actually, the investment is very important, but it costs much less than buying a factory or buying machine, buying capital, physical capital. So in fact, this this business is by itself producing less economic growth because it produces less investment spendings than the old economy. So just to give a macro perspective, they might have this in their culture, which I actually doubt, but they might value more their consumer than their shareholder. In the figures, what we have observed for the last 10 or 15 years is that this secular stagnation, the fact that productivity and growth is declining, is partly caused by this new economy, which actually, investing in data is expensive, but much less expensive than buying physical capital as oil and steel companies would do before.
And what they do with the data is interesting. Amazon's also getting into artificial intelligence and driverless cars. A self-driving car on a very small scale, 1/8 at a list price of $400 in the United States. Yes, you can own an AWS Deep Racer. It's equipped with software that learns on a trial and error basis within an interactive environment. In other words, every time your little buggy there crashes, the computer learns something. Is that neat or is that scary, Guillaume?
Both. It's completely changing how warehouses are being managed. And the promise is that it'll bring higher capital returns. And so in many ways, Amazon is providing us a view of what the future will look like in terms of logistics, packaging, picking, and delivery to the consumer.
If you're a European policymaker, who's got more outsized power today, Facebook or Amazon?
That's a great question. I think I would probably go for Amazon. That's
why.
Well, because it has demonstrated an ability to go into multiple market spaces and disrupt incumbents, and Facebook has not been able to do that. They're the king of social media, but they have not been. Amazon has been able to disrupt book distribution, fast-moving consumer goods, food, fresh food, clothing, and tomorrow healthcare and insurance.
Eva, at the outset of our conversation, you warned us that Amazon might be a giant with feet of clay. Listening to Guillaume, do you still think that?
Yes. I mean, they don't make any money. They don't make any money. So this whole conversation about the stock prices is a red herring. I mean, let's just talk about the operating business. The operating businesses, they're ruining the economy for so many categories, but they're still not making any money. So Jeff Bezos is having a super good time with that little buggy. I'm sure he is. And he's having a super good time with, talking about having little planes drop packages in front of your house. But it doesn't do any good for the overall economy. I think that ultimately, if the glamour part of the stock goes away, that part will go away. They're going to ruin the business. They're not going to bring in any more money into the economy, as you have said. And in addition to that, they're just going. Companies are just going to never be able to come back.
Wait, so could Amazon, after dragging down the smaller competitors, could it just be a flash in the pan that itself gets dragged down?
Correct. So let's just look at the book business in the United States, which is where it first went into. So it went into the book business and it had this really deep inventory. But the deep inventory meant that it had these third-party salespeople, or what we call drop ship, which is it got books from the original warehouses and then sent them. Over time, it's 20 years now, right? They have absolutely wiped out any profitability in the U.S. book business. They have done their own publishing business. They've done their own, instant publishing business. And that part of the business still doesn't make any money. It is dragged down. It's killed all these other businesses. And who knows, as soon as everyone is dead, just like you've said, they're going to maybe raise the prices and the consumers will end up not liking it so much. So I don't know about the feet of clay. I think they'll exist, but they'll exist non-profitably.
And again, we're at the cusp of perhaps a change when it comes. Do the European policymakers get it? Do they understand what's at stake here?
I don't think that they get it, especially because
I'm shaking your head too.
I think they do.
I don't think that they get it, especially on one particular aspect. They do believe that Amazon is actively investing in automation, and this is the part that they get wrong. Because Amazon was transparent, was adamant about this. What they are doing is what Jeff Bezos described back in 2005 as artificial intelligence, meaning fake artificial intelligence, or as the French say, faux automation, fake automation, meaning that the drones and the self-driving cars and the super-performing recommendation algorithms are just a facade, are just a puppet show that is there to attract investors on the one side, and the way they produce these services or these robotic solutions is basically by putting to work humans behind this facade. By humans, I actually mean micro workers who are clicking and providing data and providing solutions in real time. So the point that the policymakers are not getting is that instead of focusing on sales and data and automation, they should focus on labor. They should regulate labor inside Amazon and labor in the entire ecosystem influenced by Amazon.
All right, pay attention to the citizens. We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, because we're running short on time. I want to thank you so much, Antonio Casali, Anne-Laure Delatte, Guillaume Villon de Benveniste, Eva Sieve, and thank you for being with us here for this special year-end edition of the France 24 debate.